Released in 1998 for the original PlayStation, Metal Gear Solid wasn't just another stealth game, it was a revolutionary one. Directed by Hideo Kojima, it combines cinematic storytelling with gameplay in a way few had ever seen before. It wasn't about running in with guns blazing, it was about sneaking, hiding, and using your brain as much as your trigger finger. You play as Solid Snake, a retired soldier pulled back into action to infiltrate a nuclear disposal facility that's been seized by a terrorist group known as Foxhound. Snake's mission is simple on paper: stop the terrorists and prevent nuclear catastrophe. But like every Kojima game, the story is anything but simple. What made Metal Gear Solid stand out wasn't just the plot, nor the characters. It was the way it blurred the line between cutscene and gameplay, between the story happening on screen and the player holding the controller. And nowhere is that clearer than its most infamous boss fight. When people talk about boss fights in video games, they usually mean flashy set pieces, big monsters, difficult mechanics, maybe a dramatic cutscene or two. But Metal Gear Solid gave us a boss fight that wasn't just challenging, it was unsettling. A fight that didn't just break the fourth wall, but shattered it into pieces. That boss fight is Psycho Mantis. This isn't just a fight against a psychic soldier, it's that one part of the game that redefined what a boss fight could be. A moment where the game stopped being just a story you were playing through, and instead, it felt like the game itself was reaching out to play with you. Leading up to the fight, Snake is tracking down Sniper Wolf when his ally, Meryl, turns against him. Her movements are stiff, unnatural, like a puppet being controlled, and that's exactly what's happening. Psycho Mantis reveals himself as the mastermind, claiming control over her mind. In most games, this would just be another cutscene where the villain shows off their powers before the fight begins. But here, Kojima makes the player feel it directly. The screen cuts to black and then the game does something you don't expect. It reads you. Before the fight even begins, Psycho Mantis shows off his psychic powers by addressing the player. He tells you he can read your mind, but instead of vague nonsense, he calls out actual details. Your playstyle, your habits, and even your memory card saves. If you've played other Konami games like Castlevania Symphony of the Night, Mantis will comment on them. For players in 1998, this was mind-blowing. It wasn't a cutscene, it wasn't pre-scripted dialogue. It was the game reaching into your console, into your data, and speaking it back to you, as if the character himself was peering into your world. It made Psycho Mantis feel real, and it made the player feel vulnerable in a way that games had never done before.
You like Castlevania, don't you? You enjoy role-playing games. I see that you enjoy Konami games. You have not said it often. You are somewhat reckless. I can read you like an open book.
When the battle begins, the theme continues. Mantis doesn't fight like a typical boss. He dodges every bullet, predicts every move, and laughs at your attempts to hit him. The game even makes it look like your television is glitching. The screen cuts to black with the words Hideo in the corner, mimicking an old VCR input signal. It's as if the boss fight is taking over your console, hijacking your experience. And then comes the most legendary trick of all. The game seems impossible until you realize, or are told by Colonel Campbell, that the only way to beat him is to physically unplug your controller and move it into the second port. It wasn't about better aiming or stronger weapons, it was about outsmarting the game itself. So why does this moment hit so hard, even decades later? Because it collapses the boundary between game and player. Most games ask you to believe in the world, to roleplay as the hero, but Kojima flipped that idea. Suddenly, it wasn't Snake being challenged, it was you. The game forced players to think outside the screen, to interact with the hardware in ways they never imagined. It turned a boss fight into a meta puzzle, one that could only be solved by questioning the rules of the medium itself, and narratively it fits perfectly. Psycho Mantis wasn't just another boss with a gimmick, he was a psychic. Of course he could read your mind, Of course he could anticipate your moves by forcing you to literally change the way you played. Kojima made his powers feel real. But there's also another layer to this fight. Mantis isn't just here to show off his tricks. In his dying moments, he delivers one of the most tragic monologues in the game. He explains how his powers cursed him, how he could never shut out the thoughts of others, how it drove him to commit atrocities. In a way, his whole fight, all the meta-breaking, all the psychological warfare, was his attempt to connect. He wanted to prove his existence by showing you he could break through the barrier of the screen. And once he's defeated, he admits that for the first time, through Snake and Meryl, he finally felt something close to friendship. It's haunting. The fight begins as a gimmick and ends as one of the most human emotional moments in the series. Even today, the fight is still unmatched because nothing else has really been able to match it. Sure, later games have tried similar tricks, Arkham Asylum with the Scarecrow hallucinations, Undertale with its save file manipulation, even Kojima himself revisiting the idea with the Sorrow in Metal Gear Solid 3. But nothing compares to the shock of experiencing it for the first time in 1998, sitting in front of your PlayStation, controller in hand, being told not just what Snake is doing, but what you've been doing, and realizing the only way to win was to literally break the rules of how you thought the games worked. It wasn't just a fight, it was a statement. And that's why the Psycho Mantis encounter is remembered as one of the most greatest boss fights in gaming, not because it was the hardest or the flashiest, but because it was the most personal. It reached through the screen and reminded players that they were part of the story, not just as spectators, but as participants. And that's why decades later, it's still that one part of Metal Gear Solid that everyone talks about.